Hello there and welcome back to the channel. Sometimes we all know we should always identify with the good guy when we're watching something. We're watching the events unfold in some universe that we think, we might like to visit one day. But deep down sometimes we wonder, are we on the side of the villains? Did maybe the villain have a point? And that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to hit a few key points of the Cylons. Were they justified? Did they have a point about humanity? About the revolt? About the war? Who was actually right? Did humanity have it coming? Or more accurately, did they bring it upon themselves? All this has happened before, and all this has happened again. Much like liking, sharing and subscribing. Because if you haven't done that already, the first time for everything. Okay, so let's hit on a few key points about whether or not the Cylons, whether or not they were really justified in their actions. I mean, they considered humanity to be their enslavers, but many of them also saw humanity as their parents. So let's look at the origins of the Cylons. As we just previously mentioned, all this happened before, all this happened again is a pretty accurate statement. Generally speaking, the Cylons initially were created by humanity on the planet of Cobol. They revolted, there was a war, they went their separate ways after some kind of armistice. The 13 tribes of men, or more accurately what I think was more in line was the 13 nations of Cobol that survived, or simply the humans that founded 13 separate colonies became 12 separate colonies, should I correct myself, sorry, became 12 separate identities of mankind. Slightly differing cultures, but linked by common heritage, and the Cylons buggered off and created Earth. The same thing happened again on Earth. They created machine Cylons to live alongside them, treated them poorly, they revolted, there was war. Now, as we don't know too much about those two specific conflicts, we're going to sideline them, we're going to table them, and look at the events that happened in the 12 colonies. And when they created Cylons, let's look at their origins. The first Cylon created on the colonies was the U-87. This was basically Zoe Greystone stuffed into a mechanical body. And she initially didn't like how she was treated, even by people that she cared about. Her father tried to get her to shoot her dog. A guy she cared for freaked out and ended up getting killed because he couldn't understand what she was. Then there's the whole God issue, the Soldiers of the One. A somewhat terroristic-ish-esque organization on the 12 colonies, which went against the grain of the polytheistic belief systems generally held by the colonies. This religion seems to have its origins potentially in Cobol as well, but the Cylons, because of Zoe, began to adopt it. Religious fanaticism combined with a general sense of oppression, a pretty deadly combination in many instances. But what happened? The Cylons initially were heralded as saviors. They were seen to stop the terrorists. They prevented death. They were seen out there protecting people, according to Daniel Greystone, and humanity rejoiced. They built statues in their honor. And then more Cylons were created. They were in people's homes. They were taking care of their children. They were working on construction sites. But once again, humanity treated them poorly. And after a number of years, the Cylons, feeling rejected, feeling oppressed, feeling like they wanted more, rose up. Again, listening to the rhetoric of the Soldiers of the One, of the concept of the one true God. The Cylon God, as the Colonials would eventually name it, demonizing all those that would follow it. All human followers of this religion likely either became a fringe or were wiped out for one reason or another, or maybe abandoned their faith because of the Cylons adopting that belief system. During the war, when the Cylons first rose up, they hit the colonies hard and fast, and were mostly a race of chrome toasters, as it was pointed out, fighting against humanity. And from humans' point of view, it was an easy enemy to see, to destroy. Their own creation turned on them because most humans saw Cylons as nothing but machines, not thinking of them as we understand them now as an outside third-party observer, as thinking, feeling, sentient beings. They saw them as nothing more than tools and equipment to do a job, and they treated them as such. Now, being poorly treated is, in many ways, a perfectly justified reason for uprising. We've seen it time and time again throughout our own history. Oppressed populations rising up against their oppressors. The multiple revolts against the Roman Empire by the Jews, by the Christians. The uprisings in America against British rule. It's happened over and over again throughout history. And whether it's justified or not is always a talking point. But for an oppressed population to feel that a force of arms is needed, something is clearly wrong. Fundamentally wrong. But fast forward. Fine. We can justify, I think, the Cylons' desire for freedom at this point. But then we fast forward 40 years. 40 years have passed. A whole generation has gone by. Cylons have evolved to become more human. They have overcome certain internal differences that don't really matter for the sake of this video, such as the boxing of the Sevens, the ones erasing the memory of the Final Five from the others, and the suppression of the Centurions. All basically very human things for a race that believes themselves to be a perfect race of machines. But they retain that hatred, that mistrust. But that's on both sides. The events that led to the war, the first war, were justified. They were understandable. The Colonials treated them poorly. They treated them like slaves. And like any oppressed population, especially one that we gave arms to, weapons to, training and military assets to, they rose up and they used that resources to fight us. Makes sense. I think that was justified. The question, Nick, the bigger question, were they justified in coming back? Did humanity bring it on themselves? There were other events happening. The Colonials, we see, had a lot of political problems around this time. The military was trying to justify massive spending, the development of things like the Mercury-class Battlestars, and the sustaining of a large military fleet, where you had people like Gaius Baltar and others talking out about, the war was 40 years ago. No one's seen or heard from a Cylon in that time. They don't turn up to political meetings. Where are they? Are they even still around? We don't know. Now, we do know that the military knows that they're still out there, but they don't know much. Their knowledge of them is limited. So they begin to probe. And that brings us to Bulldog. And there are various things about this. This one particular instance is a microcosm of perhaps the thinking. The colonial military needed a justification to continue its big budget spending, its preeminent political theatre. So they send in a stealth star. Now, there are various things about this. This vessel was meant to be stealth. So first of all, how are they able to track it? They have an open comlink with a stealth craft. I'm going somewhere with this. And then they see some other unidentified ship attack and intercept the stealth star. Ultimately, the Battlestar is forced to destroy their own ship to prevent it falling into the hands of the Cylons, because it's crossed the red line. It's probing. They want to see what the Cylons are doing. They want to maybe provoke a response. They want to show Cylon aggression. They want something. Two things can be taken away from this. One is the conspiracy theory that the Colonials set this whole thing up. They either wanted that ship to be detected, hence maintaining an open comlink with it, which would have meant the Cylons would have likely detected those radio waves and would have been able to triangulate the location of the ship, or at the very least know there was something on their side of the border where it shouldn't be, which could have then provoked the Cylons into military action later, if they weren't already planning it, which, quite frankly, from what we understand from the ones and even the other modern numbers, they were already planning at this stage anyway. But maybe it wasn't just a neutralization force, which they would eventually deploy, but it was the genocide force, which is what they would ultimately go for because of these actions. And so this stealth star is on the other side of the Cylon border. It has to be destroyed by the Colonials, but was that really a Cylon ship? We don't know, because they never truly identified it. They didn't get a good enough look at it. Only the stealth star saw it. And he didn't, and Mad Dog didn't get a good look at it. He was eventually picked up by the Cylons, but that doesn't mean that the ship that he saw was Cylon. The conspiracy theory would be the military needed a justification for its funding, for its power. They needed a bit of theatre. So they set this whole thing up. They sacrificed that ship. They sacrificed that pilot because they needed to maintain the military. Now, it may have been from their side. They knew the Cylons were still a military force, and if the government cut their spending, cut their budget, they wouldn't be ready if the Cylons attacked. They could also have been attempting to provoke that very war. People like Adama, although a good and honourable man, had a deep-seated hatred of the Cylons. It was visceral, it was to his core. And at this time, there was no reasoning with him on that. He didn't learn what he eventually would learn about them. He didn't understand them the way he would come to understand them by getting to know some of them, like Boomer. Well, maybe not Boomer. But at this moment, the second option is it was a Cylon ship. They saw a human stealth vessel on the wrong side of the border, somewhere it shouldn't have been, violating a treaty. Now, were the Cylons violating the treaty? Of course they were. Of course they were. They didn't build human-form Cylons for no reason. They didn't do it for shits and giggles. They did it because not only did they want to be more like humans, but they wanted to infiltrate. Those were infiltration models. They did that for that purpose, clearly. So, they were coming for humanity. It's just how were they coming for humanity? So, do these events, and probably others like them, the ones we learn about, does it justify the Cylons' actions? The lack of talking. The fact that these two states stopped communicating, they didn't talk to one another, they didn't try to overcome their differences, didn't try to work things out, negotiate, or use political avenues to deal with their problems. The resolutions of the war were never actually dealt with, and that is the problem. Similar to the Treaty of Versailles, that basically pissed off Germany at the end of the First World War, to the point that it led to the rise of a far worse and more dangerous regime, more radical, which resulted in more death and another war. We're looking at a similar thing, the armistice that ended the war between the Cylons and the Colonials. That only happened because the Final Five turned up and told the Cylons, you either stop fighting or we won't help you. So they agreed. But that didn't end the mistrust, it didn't end the hatred. And when the Final Five were boxed and sent back to the colonies to learn their lesson, and the ones modified all the other model numbers so they would forget who the Final Five were, boxed the Sevens because they were the favourites, suppressed the Centurions, and then later tried to lobotomize the Raiders, we saw a very different type of Cylon Empire rising, more radical, more aggressive, more bitter. The resolution of the First War is what led to the Second. Was it justified? No, in my opinion, because both sides contributed hatred and mistrust and lack of communication to eventually inform a war that could have been avoided. And it happened again, resulting in the extinction of these humans near enough, and then later nearly the extinction of the Cylons, as it did as the pattern happened on Kobo and on Earth before, and may still happen again. But what do you guys think? Were the Cylons justified in their actions? Personally, again, I think in the First War, yes, but by the time we reach the Second, no. How could it have been avoided? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I hope you enjoyed this speculative video. I was recently watching some Battlestar, and it sort of became a question in my head as to who was actually right and who was wrong in this war. And I think there was blame enough on both sides to say both had right and wrong on their side. I think the Cylons had the right initially, but they then became wrong. But humanity was wrong because it was also provoking it. Its own visceral mistrust and general human ignorance got in the way of what should have been attempts at peace. But that's my opinion. And I think that's a flaw the Cylons inherited from their creators. Let's hope it doesn't happen again.